Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today. I've spent a lot of time or a little bit of time on this stage with Shinorama, so it's a real privilege to be here and talk to you about what Cystic Fibrosis Canada is, what cystic fibrosis is, and the impact that you have the potential to make. One of the things that Dr. Mummakat said is that social entrepreneurship is somebody who wants to run a successful business, but they have a giant heart. I'm going to add an "and" to that, and they have a giant heart. As we go through, you're going to hear about some of the work that our volunteers do, because we are very much a volunteer-driven organization. But before we get to that, I'm going to talk to you about what CF is. Is anyone here familiar with CF? Everybody there's fewer hands down than up, because CF is a rare disease. Only 4,100 Canadians live with cystic fibrosis. But it's the most common fatal genetic disease affecting Canadian children and young adults. It used to be strictly a child's disease, because people were born with CF and they didn't live long enough to become adults. But because of the work that our volunteers do, to raise money and raise awareness and fund research, there's now more young adults living with cystic fibrosis than there are children, and that's a huge victory for us. So there's no cure for CF, but there's hope, a whole lot of hope. Like a lot of chronic diseases, cystic fibrosis carries a stigma with it. It's an invisible disease, so unless you're familiar with that CF cough, you might be sitting next to somebody with CF, and you wouldn't know it. You might also be sitting next to somebody who's a carrier. About 400 individuals live with cystic fibrosis in Atlantic Canada. In Nova Scotia, there's only 200. But when you think about that, Atlantic Canada is a pretty big place with a pretty sparse population. But 10% of the people in Canada living with CF are right here in our community. In Atlantic Canada, we have 5 specialized clinics, which I'll talk about in a little bit. We also have 8 volunteer-led chapters. These chapters are led by people living with CF, by their families, their sisters, their brothers, their mums, their dads, their aunts, their uncles. And sadly, some of them are led by people who have lost their kids to cystic fibrosis. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, you know what, I want to have a need to be affiliated with a disease-related charity. Nobody wants that need. But our people who live with cystic fibrosis and our families have that need because they know we're that close to a cure. They have that need. So when Dr. Mummakat says, you know, it's tough to sell stuff, it's tough to create something and to sell it, do it anyway. So as you're doing that, as you're doing it anyway, think about those people who didn't pick to be involved with Cystic Fibrosis Canada. They didn't pick to raise money and raise awareness and fund research. It picked them, and you're making a huge difference for them. So what is cystic fibrosis anyway? It is a genetic disease. It's a multi-system disease, but primarily it affects the digestive system and the respiratory system. So one of the biggest things that you'll notice with somebody with CF is that they have a persistent cough, and it often involves thick, sticky mucus. Mucus's job in your body is to move things around, but when you have CF, it's very thick and sticky, making it a really good breeding ground for a lot of illnesses, for a lot of bacterias that a normal person can come and go with. People with CF often live with a wheezing and a shortness of breath. They often have chest infections. It might be pneumonia. Things like MRSA or superbugs are incredibly dangerous to them. Bowel disturbances are very common. Weight loss or failure to gain weight despite having an increased appetite. People with CF have a very unique diet. A lot of people would really just, they'd push their best friend out of the way to eat pizza every single day, to eat high-fat, high-protein, high-calorie foods every single day of their life. But the impact on that would be that they'd probably go up a couple sizes in their clothing. People with CF are required to do that. Not only that, but every time they put food in their body, they're required to take a handful of enzymes just so their food digests, so no food goes in without pills first. In fact, they often take up to 40, 50 pills just to get through a regular, healthy day. I'm going to show you a little video about what it's actually like, because I can tell you what cystic fibrosis is all about, but this video will demonstrate what living with CF is actually like.
Continue blowing, a few seconds more, hang in there, push further if you can, hang in there, keep blowing, blow and empty, big breath back in before coming off again. Off you come.
My name is Tara Burke, and I'm from Sarnia, Ontario, and I'm 22 years old. Cystic fibrosis is a genetic disorder, so I was born with it. In your day-to-day life, cystic fibrosis would kind of make things more difficult to do your regular activities because your lungs don't function properly. So it's like you've run a 400-meter sprint, and you're at the end and you're kind of trying to catch your breath, and you cannot quite take in enough air at one moment to catch your breath. That's what it felt like to brush my teeth. And your digestive system doesn't work properly, so you have to take pills to help digest your food so that you're getting all the nutrients and the fats out of it. I had a double lung transplant February 1st, 2012. When I was in grade 12, my lung function started to drop, and I ended up spending the next year and a half in and out of hospital. My weight was dropping, and eventually the doctors determined that I was in end-stage function for CF in my lungs, and the only treatment for that is a double lung transplant. Before my transplant, I was doing 6 to 7 hours of treatments a day between eating and sleeping, so that was my entire day. So I have to go to clinic once a month right now because my lungs are in chronic rejection. So I have to be monitored closely to make sure that I don't catch any infection or have any more damage occur to my lungs. I'm anticipating being told that my lungs have further deteriorated and that I'm closer to needing a second transplant than I would like to be. I'm always hopeful that I've maybe held stable and I can avoid that for a little while longer. But my tactic for doing well in clinic is going in expecting the worst, and anything better than that is easier to deal with. I am tired. The waiting between appointments and doing all the different tests, early mornings, go, is very tiring. I don't have a lot of energy to begin with, so I will probably be, cutting my activity down to minimal for the next week or so to recoup from these days. I would say my greatest fear living with CF and transplant is dying young, simply for the fact that I'm huge on family and reaching milestones. I'm the cheesy friend who celebrates every graduation, every birthday, every event that happens in anybody's life. It's hard to not be able to plan for those things because you don't know if you're gonna make it to your wedding day or to graduation. So my biggest fear would be, not making it to that point and leaving behind my family and friends to deal with the aftermath of me passing away. For everyone who donates anything from $1 to $50 to Cystic Fibrosis Canada, you really make a huge impact for someone living with CF, just to see how far research has come and to participate in clinical trials. Someone who donates $50 alone just covers the cost of an adult going to clinic and being able to get the medications we need to survive on a daily basis. It's kind of surreal to see people supporting your cause because essentially they're supporting your life.
For every Tara, there's a Jessica and a Jamie, a Jeremy, Stefan, Tim, Ali, all young adults who live in our community and live with cystic fibrosis. As people live longer with a chronic disease, they see new and different complications. So things like cystic fibrosis-related diabetes. The disease resides in your pancreas, and you can't go through your whole life eating this crazy high-fat diet without it taking a toll on your body. Liver disease, further bowel obstructions and intestinal issues, infertility, dealing with the challenges as a young adult of getting health insurance or getting married and helping somebody else understand your disease, and also the mental health impacts. We just came off of Bell Let's Talk Day, and it's pretty impactful to see some of the stories that our people are sharing. So how do you get CF? Well, interestingly enough, right here in this room, one of you could be a carrier. That means that you might meet someone this evening who's also a carrier, and you may decide to start a family. So you need a carrier mom and a carrier dad who decide to start a family. And once they have that combination, which you may not even know unless you're aware of a family history of CF, there's a 25% chance that your child will be completely unaffected. They won't be a carrier and they won't have CF. There's a 50% chance that your child would be a carrier. And again, you wouldn't know because it's an invisible disease, and as a carrier, it's just a genetic defect that you would carry. Or there's a 25% chance that you might have a child with CF. The reason I say one of you in this room may be a carrier is that 1 in 25 Canadians carry the gene. It's an abnormal gene that's responsible for cystic fibrosis. Interestingly, it was discovered due to research funded by volunteers and funded by groups like this. It was discovered in 1989 at Sick Kids Hospital right here in Canada, so we're pretty proud about that. So what is Cystic Fibrosis Canada? Our vision is a world without cystic fibrosis, which is a pretty bold statement. But to break that down, our mission is to end CF, and we help all people living with CF by funding world-class research, supporting and advocating for high-quality, individualized CF care, and raising funds for that purpose. So what you're doing is very much supporting part of our mission. We've come a long way. In 1960, when Cystic Fibrosis Canada started, kids weren't living to start elementary school. They weren't living to start kindergarten. And now, today, our median age of survival for a child born in 2015 is 53.3 years of age, meaning there's a 50% chance that they're going to live that long. It's still too young, but what a difference. So what do we fund with research? Looking at our mission, what are you going to be funding? We fund research. We fund $51.1 million of research a year. And we have a panel that selects, a scientific advisory committee that selects our research. And it ranges from everything from gene therapy. It is a genetic disease, so that's a big part of it. Looking at the impact of CF-related diabetes and how to live with that. Looks at lung inflammation and lung infections, how to avoid it, how to treat it, what to do when it happens inevitably. Personalized research, which is really a very hot topic right now, so that genetic individualized therapy, that when you can treat one part, you can treat many after that. And then, of course, quality of life and making sure that as people are living longer, they're living better as well. We talk about clinical care, and our CF clinics are really a pretty special place, and everybody says that, but we mean it. We have 42 clinics across Canada, and those clinics are fully multidisciplinary clinics. So when somebody visits a CF clinic, they see a full team. They see a doctor, a respiratory therapist, their nursing staff is incredibly involved. They visit a pharmacist there, they have a physiotherapist, a social worker. Often they're involved with psychology because, as I mentioned, mental health is a really big spin-off of this. In Atlantic Canada, we have 2 clinics in Newfoundland, 1 in New Brunswick, and then 2, of course, at the IWK and the QE2 in Halifax. And they're really very special places. In addition to that, we fund our transplant clinics across Canada. So transplantation is not a cure for CF, but it's an end-stage treatment. And it can take a long time to get our transplants, so we want to make sure that our patients are waiting and getting care at the very best places they possibly can. Atlantic Canadians requiring transplant need to move to Toronto, and they need to live there while they wait, which is a very expensive thing to do. Advocacy or awareness, or what some people like to say, oh, government lobbying, and look at it as a bit of a, not something they want to be involved with. Our advocacy program is incredibly important. We don't raise awareness to prevent cystic fibrosis. We raise awareness so that educators and employers know more about the disease, so when they meet somebody, they're able to work with them, they're able to understand it, and they're able to make their lives as normal and functional as possible. But from an advocacy perspective and our government relations work, we focus right now on have focused on two main areas, and one is newborn screening. This means that because of the work of Cystic Fibrosis Canada and our volunteers and the funds that are raised, all 10 provinces and 3 territories have newborn screening. So there's no mystery when a child is born. They're screened at birth, much like they are for heart issues and hearing. They're screened at birth so that they can begin any treatment right away. There's no mystery about, why do I have a child who's eating and not gaining weight? Why do I have a child who's constantly sick? And we avoid that immediate and permanent damage that can be done to a child. Access to drugs is another huge area. There are over 95 drugs in the pipeline right now that are going to be coming out for CF people. People living with CF have this hope of these drugs, but they're expensive and they're hard to get access to, and there's many levels of government that need to approve. Recently, we had a huge victory with access to drug advocacy with Kaleido. It's a drug that is quite literally saving lives. So when you think about, what do I do that really makes a difference? Look up Tim Vallely on YouTube, because he's 50 years old and he lives with cystic fibrosis because he got access due to the volunteer work and funds raised by Cystic Fibrosis Canada. So where do you come in? We want you to help us make CF stand for Cure Found. This is Tim here, actually. Tim's grown up in the picture, jumping on his trampoline with his son, Isaiah. Before Tim had access to Kaleido, he could jump on the trampoline literally for 15 seconds. Tramp jumping is actually a bit of a therapy for people with CF because it helps to loosen the mucus. So Tim had a goal. He can jump on there all day long now. He can live. He's not waiting to die anymore. So we need your help. And our project that we're bringing to you, there's lots of projects that Cystic Fibrosis Canada have on the go. But our big one, our national project, is the Walk to Make Cystic Fibrosis History. Every charity has a walk, and this is ours. What's unique about our event isn't that it takes place on May 27th, because there's also another very significant charitable walk that takes place that day. What's unique about it is that it's the one opportunity for our families to come together, and here's why. When you live with cystic fibrosis, you are not contagious to somebody else who's perfectly healthy. We are more contagious to them when we have a cold or a flu or a bug or whatever that is. But if you have 2 people with cystic fibrosis in close proximity to one another, they can be quite fatally contagious to one another because they'll carry bacteria like Pseudomonas, MRSA, Burkholderia cepacia. These are things that they can pass back and forth to one another. And remember I said that mucus is thick and sticky? Well, these bugs get in there and they found the perfect place to live, and they can be quite deadly. So our walk is an outdoor event where we can bring our families together and raise some great community awareness. Across Atlantic Canada, we have 11 walk locations. 4 of them are virtual. That means you can walk or you don't have to walk. You register, you can be in the middle of nowhere where you're the only person living and you can have a walk. So we have 11 locations, and they range in size and they range in the amount of funds they raise. But we're proud of every single one of them because it gives our community that chance to come together and raise awareness and raise some much needed funds. So here are the challenges. We have so many victories. We've come so far with research. We've come so far with our advocacy work. We have newborn screening. We have these fantastic clinics. But here are our challenges. We have a small population of cystic fibrosis families, 200 people living with CF in Nova Scotia. Now, just because they live with cystic fibrosis doesn't mean that they want to raise their hand and say, I have a chronic disease. I have a disease that's probably going to shorten my life and may impact my ability to work with my local employer. They may not have a desire to raise funds or do a walk. Cystic fibrosis is a rare disease. You saw how many hands went up when I said, who knows what CF is? And that's not uncommon. If you were to ask somebody, what is CF? A lot of them would say, oh, isn't that the Canadian Forces? CF, it takes some thinking. It's not a disease where you look to your left and look to your right and you see somebody who's impacted by CF. But it has extremely deep roots. So once you've met someone with CF, once you've seen the amount of time that they and their family spend on their treatment just to stay alive, you just don't forget it. It's very, very impactful. Within our CF community, thinking about our events and thinking about Cystic Fibrosis Canada and our walk, we have very good awareness. Most of them know we're there, they know we have a walk, they choose to participate or they don't. But beyond our immediate families, and beyond our immediate people who live with CF, there's very limited awareness of the walk, very limited awareness of cystic fibrosis, and of the good things that are happening. I mentioned before there's a walk for everything. One of our biggest challenges is there is a walk for everything. There are so many charities out there that have walks. You can walk, you can roll, you can ride, you can go on a motorcycle, all of these things. So it's a cluttered market for us. And we really struggle. I shouldn't say we struggle. We work really hard to make sure that we're shining in that market. I mentioned that our people with CF can't come together. One of the greatest sources to spread the word about events and talk about an organization is a support group. In fact, sometimes if you're diagnosed with an illness or have a condition, whatever you want to think about it, you reach out to somebody and you sit down with a coffee and you talk about it. Or you get together with a support group. But we don't have that opportunity because of infection prevention and control. We can't knowingly have a Cystic Fibrosis Canada sponsored event with more than one person invited. It's very challenging. And thinking about awareness, there's a lot of really cool stuff you can do, and you can spend a whole lot of money doing it. We're a national organization, and we work with our national team, and they represent from coast to coast. In fact, a lot of what they do comes directly from Atlantic Canada. But our budget here in Atlantic Canada, or more specifically in Halifax, Dartmouth, is minimal. And when I say minimal, I mean non-existent, basically. So it's a challenge. But there's also really unique and creative ways to raise awareness without writing a check. So here's how you might be able to help us. A couple things I'd like you to, we'd love to get some ideas from you, because my team is here, Morgan, Brittany, and Adrienne, and we think about this stuff all the time, but sometimes you can't get inside the thought when you're inside the thought. So we'd love for you to think about how can we raise awareness about the Walk to Make Cystic Fibrosis History? How can we raise awareness about the good work being done by Cystic Fibrosis Canada and our incredible volunteers? How can we engage the broader community? Not just to say, oh yeah, I heard that there's a walk, but to actually engage them, to register for a walk in their community or a virtual walk if there isn't one there, to fundraise, to participate, to come out and be a part of that community, to donate, and then to actually be a part of making the Walk to Make Cystic Fibrosis History historical. And then finally, what can we do that's unique, creative, and thoughtful to thank and recognize participants, donors, and volunteers? So what can we do? When we think about the amazing things that the volunteers do with Cystic Fibrosis Canada, and a very small staff team does, we're lean, we're thoughtful, and we do a lot of really good things. But it doesn't happen without the input of people like you, and the thought product of people like you. So we're really excited to see what comes up over the next day with you, and we can't wait to share your success. And I can say thank you all I want. I can do #thanks till I'm blue in the face, but we have a little video that will say that a little bit better than I can. As you're preparing tonight, we did bring along some information packages for each of the groups, so we'll make sure somehow that each group gets one, and you'll be able to use that as a resource. And we'll be hanging around for a little bit too, so if you have any questions at all, we're happy to help.
Thank you for helping me. Merci de me supporter.
Thank you for joining the walk.
To help make cystic fibrosis
History.
So all of the people in that video, some of them are from here, some of them are pretty familiar faces at MSVU, but all of them are incredibly grateful for what you do. When they say thank you, it means a whole lot more than 7 letters.